Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about some of the worst mechanics in Total War Warhammer 3 that Creative Assembly should improve in the game. Either because they're outdated or just don't work that well, or generally a combination of both. Starting out with the Greenskin WAAAGH. So the way the WAAAGH works is you fight battles and you fill up a meter, and this is the WAAAGH Manga meter. This gives you growth, control, recruitment cost reduction, wins of magic power reserve, as well as a significant benefit to leadership to all armies. Once you fill up the meter, you can also call to WAAAGH on a particular target. And dependent on that target's faction strength, you will get different rewards. Over here I actually dealt with the armies of Zarnagrum, but anyway, so in this case, when you declare a WAAAGH, you either have a choice between missile strength or weapon strength, melee strength. When you declare a WAAAGH, those benefits are still active, but you also get a faction-wide benefit or some kind of benefit dependent on the target that you're dealing with. So in this case, with the dwarves, you get construction cost, weapon strength. It would have been better had I not wiped out the armies of Zarnagrum before declaring this WAAAGH, but all the same, still, you know, just gonna auto-resolve this. You take over this element, you complete the WAAAGH mission, but you still have to wait those 20 turns for the objective to be completed. And while you're waiting, you still have the effects active. That's not really the problem. The problem is that you're waiting for 20 turns for an effect to take place. You're waiting for a long time for that kind of benefit in a campaign. And even when you do complete all of the steps required for a specific WAAAGH, the rewards you're actually gaining from completing a WAAAGH are fairly meaningless. In the sense, you get some scrap or you get some units from fighting and completing a WAAAGH, so it just genuinely doesn't end up worth doing a full WAAAGH. It's actually worth to be active in a WAAAGH because all of your armies will increase their strength, but completing one is just not worth it whatsoever. So you kind of want to be in a permanent state of WAAAGH, but you obviously can't, so you complete the WAAAGH, then you move on to the next one, and you kind of don't care really if you succeed or fail. You'll still have to build up the meter anyway. So that is not how WAAAGHs should work. WAAAGHs are more, if we look at the lore, WAAAGHs are more dynamic in the lore. Like, if you keep winning, you build up, right? And your boys still follow you, and you get even more orcs showing up. If you start losing, then very, very quickly greenskins will start abandoning you. And maybe that's the kind of system, like a kind of permanent WAAAGH with various dynamic objectives would just work better than the current system we do have in the game, which is outdated as a system in Warhammer 3 and just makes it less worth it. I mean, you gotta feel bad for Gorbad, really, because one of his campaign faction effects is actually increasing the rewards gained from completing a WAAAGH, but those rewards, even with his benefit, those rewards are just not worth it. So you end up in a fairly lackluster situation with regards to that. Next up, we have Alariel the Radiant and her Defender of Ulthuan mechanic, which is a bit awkward considering the fact that Tyrion is the Defender of Ulthuan. So this entire system is completely outdated, especially because of the High Elf rework, which through the Patrons of the Realm system does heavily encourage High Elven factions to control Ulthuan if you want to get confederations, as well as the various patron seats. So that's the part where it's outdated. The reason it's horrible is because it affects your construction cost and your income, especially the construction cost. And this from the very beginning of the campaign. On top of that, it doesn't matter how much of Ulthuan really is under the control of the High Elves. All that matters is this. Do non-High Elven factions, it can even be Order-Tide factions, but do non-High Elven factions have a foothold inside the inner circle of Ulthuan? If yes, then you get severe penalties. Do they have a foothold in the outer ring of Ulthuan? If yes, then you get minor penalties. That's it. There's no nuance, there's nothing dynamic about it, it's just a really bad system. And what this means for Alariel's campaign is that you're spending much of the early game with a significant debuff, and then you dominate everything in your path because Alariel has a lot of buffs in her campaign between handmaidens, her control benefits, her trade tariff benefits for handmaidens, the handmaiden capacity, and also nullifying any kind of downside of the Sword of Cain. So Alariel ends up being a really good empire builder for the High Elves, but her campaign just ends up sucking. I mean, you can argue Ultharian has it pretty bad, and don't get me wrong, he has it pretty terrible as well. But it's one thing to have a situation where with Ultharian you're just basically encouraged to fight every single manual battle against the Lord and capture that Lord. It's another thing where regardless of what you do, you still have to deal with this crappy system. So in some ways, this is actually worse, because Ultharian can eventually not care, whereas with Alariel, you basically need to make a massive perimeter around Ulthuan, and by the time you've done with that, GG, well played, your campaign is over. Not exactly great. Next on the list is, of course, Marcus Wolfhardt's Hostility Meter. You can't get rid of it, you're constantly dealing with it throughout the course of the campaign, so enjoy dealing with enemies that have extra leadership, weapon strength, and control. Minus control in all provinces. Honestly, it is that lack of control that hurts you, because it means you're constantly going to get rebellions in your settlements. His climate obviously is not great. Now, the idea of Imperial supplies is you're supposed to get high-end units through it, and this did matter when getting things like Hellstorm rocket batteries in a campaign was a very tedious process in a regular Imperial campaign. But it doesn't matter anymore. So now you're stuck playing a very limited campaign where you're slowed down constantly by the infinite rebellions of lizardmen. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about it. Of all the factions rogue lizardmen armies spawn against, it's not the Slaaneshi or Corn Demons, it's not Cathay even, it's not the Vampire Coast, it's not the Skaven or anything else. No, it is against Marcus Wolfhardt. Yeah, that is ridiculous. This system is nonsensical from a lore perspective, from a gameplay perspective. It doesn't work well, it limits his campaign, and really, it ends up being a campaign that's just flat out not worth playing in any way. It's not even worth purchasing this campaign anymore, or this DLC anymore, partly because of the limitations due to hostility, partly because his quote-unquote legendary heroes are very outdated, and then you add in the climate situation and his limited start, and it's like, what's the point? Like, if you want an Empire DLC, honestly, the other two Empire DLCs are actually better, and I can't believe I'm saying Grim in the Grave is worth purchasing more, but it is. You get the Archlectors, Regiments Renown, Knights of the Blazing Sun. Here you get Huntsman General. Yeah, that's really useful. So a very outdated and badly designed system, and it always was a badly designed system. Some people say, oh, you just want the campaign to be easy. I'm like, no, I think I speak for the vast majority of people that this idea of screwing over the player at every opportunity in a campaign design is just terrible. It always has been terrible in Total War when we've had to deal with these kind of systems. I mean, that's the problem with playing Western Roman Empire until it's not, you can't win, and it's not even as hard as people make it out to be unless you are obsessive about never losing a territory. And even then, it's just 100 garrison battles. That's the problem with these kind of quote-unquote negative systems. They don't work in terms of making the campaign harder. They just make it frustrating. And playing a hard game is one thing. Playing a frustrating game is not ideal in any circumstance. And number 2 on this list is the vow system for Fair Bretonnia. Talk about a very outdated system. This was designed back in Warhammer 1, not 2, Warhammer 1, and it has never been updated since, I believe. I understand the idea. Bretonnia doesn't have supply lines, so you need some limits on how many armies they can field. The peasant economy was designed for peasants. The vow system was designed to limit you, at least to lords, with regards to knights, because of the upkeep you would incur on knights if you didn't have the vows completed. But it just doesn't really work all that well. First off, there's a lot of constant tedious micromanagement to do with every lord and every hero. And this is actually a bigger problem in Total War Warhammer 3 than you might believe. Because early on, it's not too big of a deal, right? When you have a couple of lords, or one lord, a couple of heroes, maybe a secondary lord. But once you start playing a longer campaign, this system really ruins any kind of fun and enjoyment you might have in a Bretonnian campaign. It really hurts you. It's the real tax that any Bretonnian player pays when they're trying to enjoy a campaign as fair Bretonnia. It's quite unfortunate, really, all things considered, about Bretonnia, because without the system, they would actually be in a much better position. And also, Alberic and Lustria. Nothing good has ever come out of Lustria. I just had to mention that specific aspect. But yeah, the vow system, very outdated and never really quite well designed. It's from an era where Creative Assembly thought that giving the player massive supply line issues was a great choice. But we no longer are in that era. And so I think it's time to move past the vow system. I think individual knight units should have a kind of warband upgrade system to represent their journey, right? So from knights errant to knights of the realm, etc. But not the lords and heroes, from my view. And finally, at number 1, by far and away, it is the Books of Nagash system, which hopefully will be removed with the return of Nagash in the Lords of the End Times DLC/expansion for the game. Let's go over the problems of the Books of Nagash. You either ignore them, in which case, dependent on the campaign you're talking about, you end up losing a lot of benefits. For instance, for Volkmar, it's actually the worst because you lose a lot of that upkeep, items, and ward save for characters if you're ignoring the Books of Nagash. But if you go for them, well, some of them are generally close, a lot of them are fairly far away, so you can spend a significant portion of the campaign chasing after the Books of Nagash. Now here's the big problem with the Books of Nagash. For Volkmar, the actual benefits of individual books don't matter as much. I mean, some of them do, 7th Book of Nagash for instance, or 3rd Book of Nagash, but the problem is the location of the books is set, so they're always going to be in the same positions depending on the campaign you're playing. The issue is that the effects of these books are randomized, so you never know what you're going to get. Now, you might think this makes the campaigns more replayable and more dynamic, but what it really does in reality is in certain campaigns you're steamrolling everything because you get like the 5th Book of Nagash if you're playing Tomb Kings, for instance, which gives you extra army capacity and a lot of Tomb Guard. Or you don't get it. I mean, there's a book that gives you 1 hero capacity for each hero as the Tomb Kings. That is ridiculously good, but again, it can either be very close, and you get it very quickly, or it can be very far away. And another problem with the entire book system is you can't gain them for diplomacy. The only way to get the books, if they're in a specific settlement, is to actually capture said settlement. Doesn't matter if it's held by a faction that you might be allies with. Doesn't matter if, say, for instance, you're allied with the faction and they take the settlement before you while you're fighting a war against the same enemy. That is why this system is so ridiculous. So the randomization of effects, the location of the books, as well as the way you gain them, just a terrible system altogether in the game. Believe it or not, they did this better with the Forge of the Cast Dwarf campaign in Realms of Chaos, no less, where the actual artifacts thereafter are always in the exact same positions every time you start them, and you can actually gain them through diplomacy. Shocking, I know, crazy idea. Maybe that's the minimum that Creative Assembly should have done with the update for Tomb Kings, but they didn't, for reasons. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. And hopefully Creative Assembly will be resolving a lot of these problems, or at least some of them. I think the books in particular are a priority, and the vows, if they do ever, will work Bretonnia, which they have mentioned that they are looking to do.